The Big Picture of Drug and Alcohol-Induced Driving, Part 1. Unfathomable numbers of lives are lost every year in the United States as a result of drug and alcohol-impaired driving. At least 10,497 fatalities from alcohol-impaired driving accidents are reported to have occurred in 2016. This startling number represents 28% of all traffic fatalities in that year. Alcohol-impaired driving was a factor in a frightening 45% of road fatalities nationwide, although it was as low as 19% in Utah, Montana and North Dakota. One or more of the drivers engaged in the collision must have a blood alcohol level of 0.08% or more, which is over the legal limit, in order for it to be considered an alcohol-impaired incident. We do know that a blood alcohol content, BAC, of 0.08% can result in considerable response, cognition, and motor skill impairment, even if it is not always simple to determine the exact amount to which alcohol impairment contributed to these incidents and the fatalities that resulted from it. If alcohol had not been a factor, it's likely that many of these deaths could have been prevented. Although it is difficult to quantify, drug driving is believed to be a contributing factor in 16% of all traffic accidents. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, released the findings of a roadside study conducted in 2015 to determine how drug impairment influenced a driver's chance of being in an accident. According to their research, compared to a sober driver, a driver who has used an illicit, non-medical, drug has a 21% higher collision risk. A driver who has used marijuana has a 25% higher collision risk. Sedative-impaired drivers had a 30% higher collision risk. The research also showed that using opiate pain relievers, like morphine or oxycodone, significantly raised a driver's chance of a collision. They also found that driving when impaired by both drugs and alcohol increased the risk of collision by 5 times. Drug and alcohol impairment not only significantly raises your risk of being in a collision, but also increases your risk of dying in one. A person involved in an accident while driving while intoxicated is more than 10 times more likely to die than a person involved in an accident while not driving while intoxicated, according to statistics gathered by the Texas Department of Transportation in 2013. Too many drivers think that their ability to drive is constant and that using drugs or alcohol won't have any negative effects on it. Unfortunately, even slight alterations in mood, physical coordination, cognition, eyesight, and perception can result in fatal errors on the road. In order to help drug and alcohol-impaired drivers recognize when they are no longer able to drive, the NHTSA developed a national campaign called If You Feel Different, You Drive Different in response to the growing epidemic of impaired driving. Although traffic regulations and fines are powerful tools in the campaign against drunk driving, self-awareness is the secret to saving lives. The background of drunk driving. Early in the 20th century, when automobile production scaled up and the number of vehicles on the road significantly rose, the issue of drunk driving came to light. When New York passed a law stating that no drunk person shall operate a motor vehicle, it became the first state to criminalize driving while under the influence of alcohol. It was a positive step, and other states quickly followed suit. Unfortunately, the early alcohol regulations did not identify the level of intoxication that constituted a criminal offense. It was also highly challenging for law enforcement to enforce the legislation because they had to rely on their own observations to establish whether a driver was under the influence of alcohol. The Big Picture of Drug and Alcohol-Induced Driving, Part 2. The first breathalyzer test, as we know it now, was created in 1936. The aptly titled drunkometer consisted of a balloon containing a chemical solution that, when a drunk person blew into it, would change color. How much alcohol was in their blood was revealed by the intensity of the ensuing hue. In comparison to the breathalyzer we are familiar with today, it was a rudimentary and imprecise test. Breathalyzer tests were regular equipment for law enforcement patrols by 1954. With the use of this cutting-edge technology, police officers now have a portable, precise, and non-invasive means to measure a person's blood alcohol content. The government was entrusted with establishing a maximum BAC limit above which a motorist might be charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated. This was done now that BACs could be correctly checked. Sadly, the BAC limit was first set at 0.15% due to a lack of knowledge and research in the area of drunkenness. We now know that blood alcohol levels far lower than this significantly affect one's ability to drive. As a result, the new regulation had minimal impact on reducing fatal road accidents and alcohol-related collisions. Alcohol impairment became a bigger issue, and by 1982, it was a factor in around 60% of all fatal accidents. In the struggle against drunk driving, grassroots action organizations started to emerge throughout the 1970s and 1980s. In recognition of the fact that teenagers and young people made up a substantial share of alcohol-impaired traffic deaths, organizations like Remove Intoxicated Drivers, RID, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, focused in particular on the issue of underage drinking. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act was adopted in 1984 in part as a result of their deed. The minimum age to purchase and possess alcohol was raised from 18 to 21 in all 50 states. Although the state governments were under no need to enact the law, they decided to do so when the federal government threatened to cut their funding for highways by 10% if they didn't. By 1988, the legal drinking age had been raised to 21 in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. Since the 1990s, every state has enacted a zero-tolerance statute that makes it possible for young drivers to be prosecuted with DUI if they are discovered to be intoxicated at any level while operating a car. The federal government established an incentive grant in 1998, and as a result, the legal BAC level was reduced from 0.15% to 0.08% in 2000. Within 5 years, the 0.08% drink drive restriction had been enacted in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. At BACs lower than 0.08%, alcohol impairment is still conceivable, and a DUI charge is still feasible. However, the number of alcohol-related road accidents across the nation decreased as a result of the new, tighter restriction almost immediately. In the year after the new restriction was passed, the number of fatalities nationwide due to drunk driving reduced by around 20%, and they have been largely consistent since then. Utah recently approved lowering its legal blood alcohol content, BAC, level to 0.05% in an effort to reduce the number of deadly drunk driving accidents. Other states might opt to follow suit, depending on how this shift is represented in DUI statistics over the following few years. Ultimately, raising driver awareness is the most efficient strategy to combat drunk driving. You are more likely to play it safe and leave your keys at home if you are fully aware of the potentially disastrous effects of driving while intoxicated.